Hey everyone, I'm Kevin with Victory 4x4. In today's video, we're going to be installing a set of our strike sliders that you see here on our 2023 Toyota Tundra. So here I have the slider assembly. This one specifically is the driver's side with the kick out toward the rear of the vehicle. We did some of the installation process over here on the driver's side and some of the steps that you're going to need to complete throughout this video during our R&D process. So for a couple of those things like thread cutting bolts and riv nut installation, we will have to jump to the passenger side frame rail to kind of overview those and show you how that's done. So to make things as clear as possible, I'll just try to call out when we're working over on that passenger side frame rail so nobody gets confused. Now, as we go to get started, I'm going to need to raise this truck up in the air and we'll kind of call out some of those holes that you'll need to drill out and things along that frame rail. So here you're looking at the driver's side frame rail kind of between the transmission cross member and the rear lower control arm mount. In here you're going to be looking for the 5 round holes kind of toward the center section of this frame rail. On this side we already have those riv nuts installed, so we will jump over to the passenger side to show you how to drill and install one over there. So we are drilling these out to 11/16. In order to do that, you can use a conventional twist drill if that's what you have available. If not, these step bits or unibits are pretty easy to come by at most of your local hardware and home stores and work pretty well. As you can see here, we've got some tape on this one. That's just to kind of indicate where we're drilling to so that we don't over drill or go too far, because then you won't be able to install those riv nuts. From here, it's just a matter of getting all 5 of these drilled out. After you get that drilled out, grab one of your 1/2-inch riv nuts and just install it temporarily into that hole. Make sure it fits nicely. A little bit snug here is okay, but you don't want to have to hammer these in or drive them in with any sort of tool. From there, you'll need to assemble your riv nut installation tool. So it'll be this 2-inch long 1/2-inch bolt, followed by a 1/2-inch SAE washer, a large 5/8 nut. This should be the only nut of its size in your bolt pack, another SAE washer, and then the riv nut itself can be installed. You can then take that whole tool assembly and insert it into the desired hole location. You'll need a 15/16 wrench to hold that center nut, and then a 3/4 socket to drive the bolt. Basically what you're doing here is compressing that riv nut until it's seated tight to the frame. So kind of use your judgment here. Once you feel that riv nut stop, you'll have to kind of listen for your impact. Go ahead and back it off and kind of check that it's seated. You can always go a little bit further if necessary. When checking these, you're just going to be looking to see and make sure that the threads are seated kind of tight against the top or inside of this frame material. So you can repeat that same riv nut installation process on the remaining round holes throughout the center there. And then coming out to the side, you'll see these black plastic caps. You should have, I think, 4 of these along the side of the frame rail. To get those removed, you'll grab a flat blade screwdriver or a panel pry tool like I have here. Just kind of dig in behind it. And those should pop free pretty easily. While you still have that clip or panel tool in hand, come up here to this ground. This is specific to the passenger side frame rail. You're just going to want to pop its retaining clip here out of the frame. You can then grab a 12mm socket or wrench to pull the 1 bolt holding this in place. Now we do have a slotted cutout here on your actual slider mounting bracket, so you can just temporarily put that bolt back there so you don't have to worry about losing it. This is really what we want to get out of the way for now. One thing to note here, kind of important, do not go back and either start the vehicle and try and move it or even just power it up at this time, just to kind of play it safe with the module that this is grounding. Then moving even further up the frame toward the front of the vehicle, you're going to be looking for these 2 vertical holes. Those 2, I want to point out now, will receive 1/2-inch thread cutting bolts once your slider is up in place. And then you'll also want to take your panel tool and pop this 1 kind of forward brake line clip free as well. With those few things out of the way, we can now start to move this slider into position on the frame. Now, doing it here on our hoist, I'm going to have a friend help me kind of lift it up over these arms, and then we'll move underneath the truck, kind of support it with a jack and show you what's going on under there. If you're doing this on the ground in your driveway or your garage, Grab 2 jacks if you have them. 1 and a friend will work just as well, but a simple floor jack can kind of achieve the same thing here. Now, as you lift this into position, the easiest place to start is by grabbing the 1.5 long 1/2 bolts with these clear zinc washers and getting those installed into the riv nuts that we put in the frame earlier on. Once you have a few of those started, we can kind of get our jack down and out of the way since it's now supported by those bolts. One thing to note here, anywhere that you're supporting this with a jack or jack stands, whatever it may be, just protect it with something, some sort of rag or cloth, so you're not damaging the finish on your slider. With those 5 bolts started, I'm going to grab a 3/4 socket and we'll kind of run these up just to pull this closer to the frame. You don't want to tighten it so much that you lose your front to rear adjustment just yet. Then coming out to the side, you can find 2 of the 5" long 1/2" bolts. You're going to use a clear zinc washer on here, and then on the inside, you'll use this 3/4 washer followed by another of those clear zinc washers and the 1/2" nylock nut. So in this location, you're passing this all the way through the frame. This one is just behind the second mounting leg from the front. You may have to kind of lift this back up. Then once you have that all the way through, again, install the 2 washers and the nut here on the inside. Now the next one of those is going to go all the way in the rear mounting hole on the side of the frame out here. What I do want to talk about, the reason we use that nylock nut, basically because you're not tightening to a solid surface, there's not a sleeve or anything that goes all the way through the frame there. You want to use that nylock nut to let you tighten this down enough that you're drawing the slider up nice and tight to the frame, but not so much that you're compressing the actual box frame material, and then that nylock's going to hold it from backing off over time. With those 2 long bolts started through the sides and the 5 shorter bolts started along the bottom, you can now start using that hardware to draw this both up and into the frame rail a little bit tighter, as all the remaining holes are going to be kind of drilled and use self-tappers or thread cutting bolts. Pay attention as you're doing this to kind of position this front to rear. Look at this front mount where it mounts out to this kind of body mount kick out. Make sure that it's nice and tight there, but still not pulling it or forcing it off of the frame too much in this location. So moving on to those thread cutting bolts, they're going to be 1" long 1/2" bolts. They are a flanged head that you can kind of see here, and they're easily identifiable by the kind of tapered cutting end. To get these installed, you are going to want to start by center punching each hole location. You're just kind of aiming for the center of each slot. And then you'll start by drilling a pilot hole. I have an 1/8" bit here. Now before you can install these, you're going to need to drill this all the way out to 7/16 for these 1/2" bolts. I'm doing that with a step bit or a unibit like I have here. You can do the same thing with a conventional twist drill set. As you can see, I have a right angle drill as well. It shouldn't necessarily be required, but it will make this a lot easier down in this location. Once you have it opened up to the correct hole size, you'll grab a 3/4 socket, ideally on an impact, and one of the thread cutting bolts. You can kind of line that up on the hole, apply some pressure to your impact, and run this in. That installation process will be essentially the same for all of these, aside from the two that already have kind of pre-existing factory holes, in which case you'll just thread the bolts right into those with no drilling required. So there's a total of 8 of these, 6 of which have to be drilled. One of them is the very back hole down here on this bottom flange. The rest should pretty much be all up on the side, and then a couple on a kick-out flange up front that we'll show you in a second. So moving up here just to kind of show you what's going on, this is that kick-out flange I mentioned. This comes out to the factory body mount, and then here you can see the two that are kind of vertically aligned. Those are where you'll have existing factory holes in the frame and will not need to drill. So as you come over to the passenger side to get your slider installed, you will first have to also remove this wire harness mounting bracket that you kind of see up here. You'll need a 12mm socket to get this bolt removed, and then it reinstalls right over the slider bracket like we have it here. Then additionally, go ahead and reconnect that ground cable, as well as check clearance to the brake lines toward the front. Make sure they're not rubbing on the slider or the frame. So obviously now back over here on the driver's side one last time. If you haven't done so already, finish tightening up all your mounting hardware, and then those of you that are just going to be running kind of the bare tube slider you see here without logo step plates, you are finished. Your install is complete. Those of you who did purchase and do plan to run our logo step plates, now we're going to show you how to get those installed. So before your step plate can go down, you're going to want to find the adhesive backed rubber pads. You're going to have a couple triangle shaped pads as well as several rectangles. The triangles go out on each end, and then the rectangles go on the supports throughout the center of your slider. So before these go down, just grab something to make sure the surface is clean. I just have a little alcohol prep pad here. So we'll wipe these down and then make sure you give them enough time to dry. You'll then obviously need to peel the backing off of the pad. And then as you put it down into place, you just want to make sure that the center slot in the adhesive pad is lined up with the slot in each support, as that's where you're going to be passing hardware through to get the step plates installed. So go ahead and press those down into place and then get all the remaining ones installed. So the step plate does consist of 2 pieces. They're not necessarily side specific. You'll simply flip them over to work on the other side. The larger one that fits the kick out obviously goes toward the rear and has the Victory logo. This kind of narrower section you see here goes toward the front. Now as you move these into position and you're kind of getting them lined up with the holes, go ahead and take a look or pay attention to kind of where all these little steps or tabs kick out on our panel. Specifically back in here, you may find that they're contacting the tube slider like ours is here. For that, we provide you a rectangle of that kind of adhesive backed rubber pad. This you will have to cut to fit. For example, I have a couple small rectangle strips that I cut earlier on, and this can easily be cut with just a decent pair of scissors, so not a big deal here. What you're going to do with that is I'm going to take the step plate, I'm actually going to pull it off and flip it over, and I'll be applying this to the back of these 3 locations kind of around the logo to give some added support here, as well as keep it off of the powder coat on the tube slider so that we're not exposing that to any rust or corrosion over time. So once you've stuck those on, it should look something like what you see here. To kind of flip it over and give you an example, you do want a small bit of this, it may not even be very visible on camera, to overhang so that this gets pinched between the step plate and the slider as you bolt this down, and that way it stays in place over time. So we can then line both of these up and work on installing our hardware. Real quick before I talk about the hardware, I will just mention that you do still have some of this material left over. So take a quick look on both the front and rear panels, especially in maybe high traffic areas where you're getting in and out of the truck in this driver's door, and see if you think you need any of that there, and kind of use your discretion with the remaining material. Now the hardware you're going to use to mount these down, they're just black 1/4 button heads. You do want to put the small washers that we provide on there, and then you're securing those on the bottom side with flanged nylock nuts. So go ahead and get all of those started. Once you do get all that hardware started, you'll grab a 5/32 hex along with a 7/16 socket ideally to reach up and hold that nut from underneath. And then as you go to tighten these up, you're really just trying to draw it tight against that rubber insulator. You don't need to go crazy and try and squish that out or anything because they do have those nylock nuts on the bottom. So we'll kind of work our way along here. As you're doing this, pay attention to the alignment of the step plate. Make sure they don't look crooked on here. And then as you come to the center, you want to make sure that the edges get lined up nice and evenly and that they're pushed nice and tight together right in here. Now ideally, you'll probably be tightening these center two bolts last, just because if you start here, they kind of have a tendency to try and push the two step plates away from one another. But with all your outside hardware already snugged up, that's not an issue. And then as you draw these two down, just pay attention and make sure you're not going so tight that it wants to bow the step plate at all out here. So just draw these in snug. And that is really all there is to it. So with this tight, you can repeat that process over on the other side and your installation is complete. Now, if you have any questions at all about this installation process or anything else we offer here at Victory 4x4, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always send us an email at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.